Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Trust Q&A Live here on the Trust Fundraising Hub. I'm Deanna Wolf, Senior Consultant for Trust Fundraising here at Money Tree Fundraising, and we come to you on the third Thursday of every month to answer your questions. So feel free to ask some questions below in the answering box or in the question box, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you're on our website on LinkedIn through Money Tree Fundraising's page, whether you are watching us through Twitter, or if you're watching us here on fundraising in the fundraising hub on the Trust Fundraising Hub here on Facebook. We've had some questions this month. We asked last week. We asked a bunch of questions of what was your question you wanted to know about fundraising and trust fundraising, and so I've got some answers for you. Hopefully, they will be the kinds of things that you're looking for. And welcome. I see we've got some watchers already. The first question was from Joe, and please forgive me if I say your name wrong on any of this. Joe Bruggenworth. And it was, why do so many trusts want to pay for stuff, but not the people to do the stuff? And I'm not a trust fundraiser, I'm not a trust funder. I don't do it. What I have been is a trust fundraiser for about 20 years. And my take on it is that trusts have been burned. They've asked for they've given funding out to places that was just staff, and then the project was never done. The impact never happened. The beneficiaries never really saw what the funding was there to contribute to. And so a lot of funders they don't want to fund you as an organization. They want to fund the impact and the work that you're doing with your beneficiaries. You're just a translator. You're the facilitator of making that work, of making that impact or that change happen for the people that you're supporting. And really, the funders want to support the people you're supporting. You're just the middleman. So if you go and if you pay for staff, there's no guarantee that that staff is going to be delivering work to the beneficiary. What they want to do is pay for the impact. So when you're working through a project and you're applying to a funder, talk about the impact that you're doing. The budget that you have for your project may include some salaries, may include some staff. But really what it is those people are needed to deliver the work to get that impact. And so sometimes what you can do in your applications is give that information and give that resource at that point. You may have to have conversations with the trusts, and you may have to work through things to make sure that they understand that the money is going to be restricted to that salary for that work. And really what you're going to be reporting on and delivering is the work and the impact on your beneficiaries and the support for your beneficiaries. The next question was from Gemma Chambers, and she asked why trusts are asking reasonably established charities about sustainability, when really what you're going to be doing is more fundraising to get the funders to keep your projects live. And what I would say is, don't go into it's not about sustainability of the project. It's not about sustainability of the fundraising or about your ability to continue delivering the project. As with why funders don't want to pay for people, they want to pay for the sustainability of the impact of what you're doing. So if you are delivering work that is going to change the lives of your beneficiaries, the sustainability, approach it not from the point of view of sustainability of the project, approach it from the point of view of sustainability of the impact for that beneficiary. So you are working with families to teach them about budgeting and surviving in the cost of living crisis. It's not about you delivering that program over and over and over again to more and more people, although more and more people will have the same level of impact. It's about making sure the sustainability is about making sure that a family now knows how in the future to deliver and manage their finances better. And so the sustainability is about making sure that that family may not fall into a crisis quite as easily because they've got the knowledge now. So it's about how that sustainability works on an individual level at the beneficiary level, not at the organizational level. This one I do know because we've had funders tell us in various programs that I've been in, various sessions that I've gone to with them, they want to know about the sustainability for the individual or the individual beneficiary or for the community that you're working with. And so you can work on it that way. The third question is from Angela Berry, and it was, what do you do to establish relationships with trusts, especially when the majority of them don't fund more than 1 year? Yeah, that's tough. And there are only a few funders who want to have a relationship before they give you funding. And I say a few as in maybe 100 or a couple hundred of them, when in fact there's 10,000 charities that give money out, although that number's up and down right now. What you want to do is find out whether or not they are approachable in the first place. And so you can do your first beginning of establishing your relationship in your first phone call that you have to them, if they give you a phone number to contact them. And that relationship building can start with simple as confirming the details of how to apply. You never want to ask them how to apply if they've already given you that detail on their website or you found it somewhere else. If you found it somewhere else, you can say, I found it on this database. Is this what true? And I just want to double check that that's accurate. That's completely reasonable. Don't ask them for money right away on the phone. If they're asking for, if they say no unsolicited, you can always sometimes you can send them a letter saying, hi, this is who we are. We just want to introduce ourselves. We'd like to have a conversation if we're the kind of organization you'd like to have to fund in the future. And if that's the case, how would we go about doing that? We just want to introduce ourselves, basically. The rest of it, a lot of times, developing a relationship happens after, especially for small trusts, it happens after you've gotten the money in the first place. They want to know that you are a good risk for them and that you continue to be so. It's easier to keep a funder than to find new funders. So steward them well, follow their guidelines exactly, and ask them if they want any other information. Give them the reporting that they want. Do what you said you were going to do in your application. Be a good grantee. Be the person or the organization they want to come back to because you helped them out and then you provided them with the information they wanted. And then continue to do that year on year on year when you're asking. Now, when they don't fund more than 1 year, they may not fund more than 1 year. And if they say, we're only ever going to fund you once, okay, that's great. Still be a good grantee. Do what you said you were going to do. And then next year, ask them again for a different project or for the same project, but with different parameters. What they're going to do is they're saying they're not going to give you multi-year funding. It doesn't mean that you can't necessarily approach them year on year on year. In fact, a lot of the smaller ones, you can. If you approach them and they don't give you funding, you might want to approach them 3 or 4 times, just try and eke out what you're doing and making sure that you've covered all the bases. And while they may not fund you this year, they might fund you next year. But really what you want to do is be a good grantee, and that will help you start the relationship. Number 4 is from Perdita Allen Buckley, and she asked, and this is a very important question. I think it's actually quite apropos and quite informative for people to know how to do it, because a lot of funders are asking. They want to find out information about beneficiary consultation. How do you consult your beneficiaries? What's the best way to go about it? What's the best way to involve them in your project design? I don't have the best answers. What I did do, though, is I Googled and I use these words exactly, how can we include beneficiaries in our project design UK? I got some great answers. And I did get one website from the lottery, and I will add that into the response box once we're done. Basically, it's you need to be in touch with your beneficiaries. You need to make sure that what you're delivering is what they want and need, not just that you've decided they need it. Now, if you're what I will say is, having worked in health and social care charities myself, if you are if you are working with people who are not particularly responsive themselves, say someone who is autistic and non-communicative, what you can do is work with the people and their support network around them, so their parents, their caregivers, the other people around them, and ask them for questions. They will know how to communicate with that person, and that's probably the best way to do it. But I found a really great website. Which one was it? It was a National Lottery work PDF that came out, and it talked about the kinds of questions you can do, how to involve them, and just generally giving a little bit more information. So I'll provide that. What I will say is it's always really good to include that your beneficiaries are on track with you. Sometimes that is you're finding out afterwards because you've had great feedback from them. This is exactly what we wanted. We needed this. Those kinds of things can be included in sometimes the beneficiary consultation. But really what it is you want to make sure that you've talked with the people that you're working with. If you're planning a new project, what you may want to do is get in touch with some of the organizations and some of the groups around you that are working with those people too, and start asking them questions and ask if they would be interested in the project delivery and the way you want to do it. I hope that answers your question, Perdita. Another question was, and this is from Vic Housen, is it possible to secure funding from grants for retrospective expenditure? And the example they gave was where they have already budgeted for it so they can ensure that work can continue. I wasn't entirely sure on that. Generally, I would say retrospective expenditure from trusts, not usually. In fact, a lot of them will say no. It may be that you need to go to other income streams for that. The same as if you are paying back loans, which is retrospective, and even it's retrospective activity is what they don't want to fund. And they don't want to fund retrospective expenditure that's attached to activity that's already happened. What they will fund often is if you've put it in your budget that you are going to be delivering this project and you've already indicated that this money is going to be spent. I'm reading the where you've already budgeted for as it's in the budget already because you want to continue a project that's ongoing. I think you can get funding for ongoing projects where the activity has not yet happened. There are some funders who won't fund that either because they don't want you to fund anything that's not already started. But if it's an ongoing activity that you deliver on a regular basis, it may be worth saying this is for activity that's happening in 6 months. And I would check out with each individual funder if you've got the opportunity to talk to them. If you've got the opportunity to talk to them on things like this is also where you can start building relationships because you have actual questions to ask them about actual situations and finding out whether something's eligible. You don't want to ask them if they'll fund it. What you want to find out, and I'm splitting hairs here, is it an eligible cost if you apply for it this way? The eligible costs is what you're looking for rather than eligible for funding or eligible funding. It's splitting hairs and it's going down into the fine detail, and it's about how you word your questions to them. You're asking for information in the front. I would say retrospective expenditure, trusts is a no-no. Retrospective expenditure for other income streams, very possibly. It depends on your relationship with the funders in those other income streams, whether it's major donors or corporates or sometimes individual giving, and if you have a community fundraising income stream, it may be that the funding that you've received there can go to pay for things that have already done. This is when trust fundraising shouldn't be sitting alone within your fundraising strategy and your grand fundraising budgets and plans of how you're going to be spending and covering costs. I hope that answers that. Generally, I think it's probably going to be a no. The next question was, we got lots of questions on whether funding had been received or we got knocked back from funding, or is it worth applying for this? And it was for some of the bigger grants as well and some of the bigger funders out there. What I would say is that the cost of living crisis is hitting them as well. And while it may hit them financially in the income that they get from their investments, or may not, depending, sometimes it goes off, their investments go opposite to the actual money that's in people's pockets. What I would say is guidelines have tightened up. Generally, across the board, guidelines have tightened up. And some funders are being very, very careful about who they fund and where they fund and how much they fund. And some of them are shutting down temporarily to find, or maintaining their shutdown status to figure out what they want to fund and how they want to fund it and where they want their money to go and what the focus is that they want to do. It's frustrating because it reduces the number of funders available. At the same time, it makes it clearer and much easier for us to know whether a funder is somebody that you should be spending time filling in an application for. If they don't fund in your area, but they used to, don't apply because they don't fund in your area anymore. And that means that you can go and find other funders to approach. And I think that's the best way to do it, is find the funders that you fit really closely. If you don't fit closely and you have the time, sure, apply. But if you're applying and you're not a good fit, you're also increasing the number of applications that funders have to go through. If you were a funder, put yourself in their seat for a moment, because I think sometimes turning that picture around and putting yourself in their place can actually be really helpful as a trust fundraiser. You've said, as a funder, you've said you're going to fund X, Y, and Z. And what you do is get a whole bunch of applications that are for W and V and T, which are very close, but they're not the exact fit. They're not what you're actually funding. That's going to make you very frustrated. And so when you do get an application that is for X, Y, or Z, your frustration level is going to be higher. Your willingness to look at an application positively and without looking for all the little details of where something could go wrong or where something doesn't quite fit, you're going to be looking much more detailed at things, and you're potentially going to be much more restrictive in the way you want to get, you are choosing to answer, because you've got 1,000 applications to look at, and you've just had 800 that don't fit the bill. So those last 200 that you're looking through that may actually fit exactly what you want, they're going to be tight and you're going to be stressed and frustrated about it. So apply where you fit. Apply where you think that there is an alignment in the specifics, if not at least the general, if not the specifics of what they're looking to fund, that your ethos is the same. And additionally, be really clear about what you're trying to do and what your impacts are going to be. So your applications have to be better quality, and they have to be more specific, and they have to give as much detail as you possibly can within the guidelines that the funder has provided for you. If they've not provided you anything, be aware of the fact that your funders are possibly looking at 4 or 5 times the number of applications that they were looking at pre-COVID, and possibly twice as many as they were looking at during COVID. So there's a lot of information that's not necessary. And so be very clear that this is what we're applying for, this is why we're applying, this is how we do it. And like I said, if they don't have guidelines, I would keep it. My rule of thumb has always been 2 pages. Keep the pictures to a minimum. Be short and sweet. Be sharp in the sweetness, so that it's very, very clear, very direct. You're answering the questions and answering as much as you possibly can about any questions they have. You are also being very specific about what you're asking for. You're not just asking, even if you're asking for general core costs and general, this is who we are and this is what we do, be very specific about what you do. Don't be too woolly, don't be too fuzzy. Be clear in the amount of money that you're asking for, that it matches the amount of money they generally give out. And if you are including pictures, make sure that those pictures are a good replacement of the words that you could have put in their place, in the space that you have. So that picture has to pack a massive punch. It has to show exactly what you're doing. And someone looks at it and goes, aha, Yep, that's why I want to give funding, because of the look on the people's faces, because of the representation of what it is, because it says exactly what you do. And that is what people will give to. It's not the time to give lots of extra space to lots of pictures that are great, but that you can indicate in your text that if they want to have more information, they can get in touch with you, or here's a website that they can go to find more information, and give them the link. But don't expect the link to always be chosen, and don't expect the link and the information on your website to replace what you need to put into your application. I hope that helps. It's getting tough out there. It's making us be much more specific about what we need to fund and why we need to fund, because you don't want to make the funder have to do an awful lot of work to be able to fund you. Now, we had another question, and it was from Carl Gwillem, and it sounded like things were a little bit confused at his between the finance, the CEO, and fundraising about where funding would be appropriate to be accrued and allotted. And it was whether money received last year but that had been unspent in last financial year can count as a match for additional funding requests for the same project. And Carl felt caught in the middle between the CEO, finance, and the funders. You're going to have to get in touch with a specific funder to make sure that this is all right. And it's probably worth having a conversation with both finance and the CEO and your head of fundraising, if you're not the head of fundraising, about what to do when this happens in the first place. And just have it as a rule of thumb or a procedure that you have internally. Your organization will already have finance rules of when they accrue and when money is listed as being spent for a specific project. However, if you've received funding from a funder for a specific project and therefore it's restricted and you have yet to spend it, you will need to let the funder know why you have not yet spent it. And so you need to be very clear about that. If it's a match fund for another project that's going on, excuse me. If it's match funding for the project and you've not spent it, but the project continues, what I would say is that money is still unspent, and so it's still a match for the activity that you're doing. If your project overlaps 2 financial years, then you need to have clarity that the money is coming in but won't be spent until the project's active and expenditure has happened. So if that project is still on hold because you don't have enough money in to start it, then that money has to sit in the bank, and it's listed. It should be listed in your unrestricted funds, but in your designated or restricted funds, and that money has earmarked for something else. If you spent it on something other than the project, then you need to be speaking with your finance team because it's been spent inappropriately, and your funder may ask for it back unless you can prove that it's been spent where it's been spent. So my suggestion is that when you get into that situation, you need to untangle this particular one, but then I think what you need to do is have an agreement between you, the finance team, fundraising, the head of fundraising, and your CEO or your SMT about how funding works that way, and just make sure it gets clearly explained so it's easily identifiable for the future. I hope that helps, and best of luck getting that untangled. I've been in your situation before, and it took a little while, but we did get it sorted out, and the funding was able to be used as match funding. I also think that people need to be very well aware of when it's match funding and when it is you are going to multiple funders for the same project for multiple amounts, but each funder is not going to be contributing to the whole project. It is match funding in some ways, but in other ways, each funder is contributing. And so unless they're specifically asking for a match, it's not necessarily match. What it is we have already received X amount, we have X amount of a shortfall or Y amount of a shortfall. And so what you're asking for is the contribution to the shortfall rather than a match to other funders. There are some funders out there that require a match, and they're very clear about it. And I think that you need to make sure that unless they're asking specifically for a match, What they may be asking for is a how much money have you raised already, so that they know that it's an active project and it's a good project for them to deliver to. Hope that helps. And then the very last question that I have for us today is from Kelsey Parsnip, who is a long-term contributor to the Trust Fundraising Hub. And I hope she's listening or is around and watches this back. Kelsey, you've been asking some great questions lately, and thank you very much, because it's contributing to the knowledge of everyone in the team, all the trust fundraisers who are members of the Trust Fundraising Hub. And she asked about targets being set on previous years, on the amount of money that came in the previous year, rather than a percentage increase on the previous target, because there had been some extraordinary gifts. And so the target was three times, I think, the amount of money that had actually been in the target was what was achieved. I think when that happens, it is stressful. And if you're speaking specifically about trusts, what I would do is, when that happens on trusts alone, I would go in and find out how much money you need from a fundraising point of view for a particular application, or for your costs that are in the projections of activities going on, and how much that will cost. So your absolute necessary cost to deliver the services you intend on or hope to be delivering, because that puts it to need rather than to want. And then your target for trust should be, can we achieve this? Are there funders out there who will deliver, who can fund in this area and fund to that amount, the total amount? And what is our likelihood of getting that funding? So right now, I would be on this. I always got taught under promise and over deliver for trusts, and then continue to under promise. And by that, I mean, be really seriously conservative in your estimation of whether the funding will come in or won't come in. So if you think that you've got 15 warm funders, I wouldn't go on the 1 in 4 is a good representation of how much money you could get in, or 25% of your asks will be successful. I would probably go on a much higher 1 in 6, 1 in 8 right now, because the cost of living crisis and the sheer volume of applications, a lot of them ineligible, that are going to funders and making them go through things. And I would make it a percentage on how much you can actually raise, as opposed to how much is aspirational. Trusts tend not to do very much aspirational funding, unless you have a long-term relationship with them and you can bring them on board with your strategy and why you're raising that funding. If that's your overall budget for all of fundraising, take a look at your other income streams and see if the capacity is there. It's one thing to set a budget based on, and a target based on previous years, but that could be from extraordinary. So I would go and take a look at, if you've got, I think you'd said 81,000 or was the target. If that's the target year on year, and that's roughly how much you're bringing in, unless you add more resource or more attention to that area and put in more capacity to that, that's what you are going to be able to get. I hope that helps, and good luck. I think there's an awful lot of funders awful lot of charities who often look to trusts as they're going to pick up they're going to pick up the slack. Trusts tend not to pick up the slack unless it's for a specific project. And that brings us to our close today. So for those of you who have come in and had a good conversation with us, or listened and found some good answers, that's great. For those of you who listen later, best wishes, and I hope that this has been helpful for you. I will see you next month on Thursday, May the 18th at 12:15 here in the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook, but we'll also be broadcasting on Twitter and MoneyTree's LinkedIn page. The recording of these Q&A lives are available to rewatch on Facebook, here in the Trust Fundraising Hub, on LinkedIn, on our MoneyTree fundraising page. I think they may be able to be watched again on Twitter, and on the MoneyTree Fundraising's YouTube page, I do believe. And please keep in mind that we only are here if we have questions from you. So if we're not getting questions, we're not going to be able to continue this. So keep asking the questions. keep being interested and wanting to know more about doing trust fundraising, and we'll do our best to answer your questions and find the information that you need. Until next month, I hope to have a good year, or have a good week and a good month, and best of luck in your trust fundraising.